I have the pleasure of being joined today by Derek Britton. Derek is the founder and CEO of DRB, B2B Limited. That's a mouthful. DRB, B2B Limited is a specialist technology marketing and consultancy firm. They provide a range of marketing strategy and advisory services to small and medium-sized businesses on either a fractional or contractual basis. Things from go-to-market, messaging, event strategy, persona evaluation, content strategy, and advisory services. Derek has a wide range of subject matter expertise in his background, and I won't age either because that won't do us any good. But think about, COBOL, legacy modernization, market strategies, and so forth, all the way through to leadership support through, hosting events, promotional support, and content creation. Derek, great to see you. How's your day going? Thanks for joining me.
Fantastic, Des. It's just started raining here, so it must be the full season here in the UK.
Yes, well,
but other than that, we're great.
For our audience, I'm here in Sydney. It's the end of my day. It's the start of your day there in the UK in London. I am very pleased to say we are coming up to summer, and it was a beautiful warm day today, and I feel bad that you're about to end up to the cold period of the year. So, Derek, before we kick off, I wonder if you could maybe just, for our audience, they will know you. You've been part of the conversation. You're a senior contributor to elneon.com. We've had a number of great engagements on digital and social platforms. But for our audience, just to sort of set the scene, could you maybe just give us a summary of kind of what a day in the life of Derek Britton's like currently, and maybe a roundup of what DRB B2B Limited does?
Okay. Yes. Well, like you say, it's a mouthful, Des, but it's very simply it's my own consultancy, and I set up as a freelancer effectively just over a year ago to fill a gap in the market that I saw, which is basically that there's an awful lot that needs saying in the tech industry, and B2B technology is moving at such a pace that there are a number of organizations that they got a great idea, they got some great tech, but it's very hard to sort of cut through the mire in terms of how they're going to tell that story in the marketplace, and the kind of help they need from a marketing perspective is, it's a very expensive thing to set up for a small organization. So there are a number of organizations that I've now been able to help, just providing advice on on an interim or fractional basis, where people are, they're looking to do something in particular, and they want someone to come and help with that particular task, and not have to invest millions and millions of dollars in order to do so. So that's, what I've been spending my time doing in the last 12 months or so.
Fantastic. And we'll include a lot more of the anecdotal background of your career path as a practitioner and a consultant advisor as we go through this conversation. So to set the scene for our audience, we had a couple of conversations, Derek and I, with regard to the fact that we're coming up to now what is effectively the 65th birthday of COBOL, the programming language, which actually celebrated its 60th anniversary in year 2019. But for all the obvious reasons, when 2020 hit, we didn't really get to fully celebrate that. And it just made sense to revisit it. And there's also a few little other elements which we'll bring into that as well. But walk us through kind of what drove this to sort of jump in your mind and be a thing. I mean, COBOL was invented in 1959, so it made it turn 60 in 2019. But here we are in 2024, it's turning 65. What kind of brought this to top of mind and made you sort of reach out and go, hey, let's do something for this?
There's a couple of things, Des. I mean, first of all, my background, I don't want to delve too far back into the past because I'll age myself, but I mean, I've been, and in fact, there's someone's already joked with me, if you cut me in half, it probably says COBOL through the middle, because I've joined I joined the industry as a COBOL programmer, having done an internship working for a COBOL company. I even studied COBOL at university, so I'm one of a rare breed of people that has COBOL in my DNA, if you like. And I was lucky enough to work for a COBOL compiler company for most of my early career, writing compilers and then talking about them and being product manager for them. So I've always been in that space, and I helped, and I remember 2019 very well, Des, that we spent a little bit of time trying to build a sort of homage to COBOL to celebrate its 60th anniversary. And like you say, more or less a blink of an eye later, the world was, focused on other things entirely, an existential crisis that, we hadn't seen before. And so sort of that fanfare fizzled out quite quickly. And then actually COBOL took some flack during the COVID era because it was blamed for all kinds of things, systems unable to cope with the changing dynamics of, the needs of IT. Um, so after that, I decided that COBOL needed its own lobby group. So we set up the COBOL working group as part of the Open Mainframe project, to try and tell the truth about COBOL, try and tell the story, keep the story straight. So we did some surveys, we wrote some articles. But I thought in the back of my mind, something else is needed. And so what better than to celebrate its next big milestone birthday? So, waiting patiently, that idea finally germinated earlier this year. And we spoke, didn't we, a couple of months ago and said, well,
Indeed.
why not do something to celebrate its birthday? And that's where the idea came from.
Yeah, I love it. And we, off air, just for our audience's context, we were been joking about the fact that, particularly here in Australia and certainly a number of places around the world, 65 is often considered the retirement age for humans. That you get to that age and you retire and go off and go fishing or painting or whatever you might be. But the reality is that, because as you said, 2019 and September the 12th is the key date, just for people who aren't aware, with regard to sort of the day at which we put a pin in the ground and went, this is the date in which it sort of became a thing in 1959. But we're coming up to September the 12th now. And, if you sort of think about timing, September the 12th was really only 30 days before COVID-19 became a thing for the bulk of the world on this side of the planet anyway. That the first week of November was when it really started emerging. It wasn't until sort of March, April, I guess, on your side of the planet, particularly America, where anyone sort of decided to take it seriously and realized how big an issue it was. So by the time we got to November and December, no one was celebrating and having cake for COBOL's birthday. It was the world's turned upside down, as you said. And as you highlighted, COBOL and the ecosystem around it and the mainframe platform did get a lot of flack unfairly for some of the challenges with the pivot to online buying and e-commerce and so forth. But I think it unfairly got beaten up on that case, where other platforms didn't. But yeah, so we're sort of coming up to the 12th of September, the actual day. And I think it's amazing that you'd actually hung on to this idea for a while. But I did love the fact that you reached out and we had this conversation about doing something around it. And to that effect, one of the things that I wanted to share with our audience and get your thoughts on and sort of share the background of it is you came with the idea of creating a guest book where, from what I understand it right, and I'll paraphrase it, but correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially the idea was to reach out to our network and particularly yours and invite people to take part in making guestbook entries for certain parts of the particular decades and maybe even certain years that are milestones throughout that 65-year lifespan so far of COBOL as a language, a programming language, an ecosystem. What sort of germinated that idea? I love it. It's great. I'm glad to be part of it. But what kind of brought that about particularly? Because it's a great idea.
What does it say about great ideas being simple ones? I mean, it was, when you go to someone's birthday party, you take a card, you send them a card, right? Or if you go to an office birthday party, everyone signs the same card, right? And you typically only go to birthday parties of people that you like. So we thought, right, well, who might like COBOL and who might want to sign their birthday card? And so, as frivolous as that sounds, what we felt was that actually that scratched an itch, that filled a need, because
Yeah.
like I say, a couple of years ago, under the auspices of the Open Mainframe project, we surveyed the market to ask, sort of some quantitative questions about COBOL usage, and so we got some stats and some facts, and it was very interesting. But it was fact based. There was nothing qualitative. There was no sense of emotional feeling. So this time around, we thought, right, well, the right thing to do on a 65th birthday is, get people turn up and actually, say something nice or say something that they feel and they believe. So the concept of a guest book, people write in hotel guest books or wedding guest books. And they say how they feel and how the day was and how they've enjoyed it, what it's meant to them. So we thought, well, that's the key question. What has COBOL meant to you? Whether you're a consultant or an end user customer or an educator or a commentator or an expert, any relationship you have with the language or with the technology, what does it mean for you? So we just reached out to the network and we said, right, well, what do you think? And what they thought was a wide and varied set of opinions, and it's been fascinating, and that's helped sort of shape a perspective and an opinion that we want to share with everybody.
I love the idea. And in many ways, I do like that analogy with regard to the hotel COBOL, because we do kind of check in and out of that COBOL environment over our careers. I mean, I have this funny anecdote, which I've shared many times, but I'll just reiterate that I actually literally forged my mum's signature 3 times in letters to get permission to work after school. As a 15-and-a-half-year-old at the time, you legally had to be 16 to get a tax file number, and I forged my mum's signature to get a job at Datacom in a town called Nelson to work after school, 3 shifts a week on mainframes. And at that age, I wasn't really allowed to touch the COBOL code. But over time, in the 80s, I had a lot of exposure in working on platforms and writing COBOL. In the 90s, I was involved in the Y2K problem, and from 98 onwards, worked on a large part of around the world, particularly this side, that Y2K challenge and updating, and that involved getting my hands on a frighteningly large amount of COBOL. It even gives me shivers now. And then in the early 2004 era, sort of the post.com boom, where people tried to move off the ecosystem and go to cloud and as a service environments or utility computing, and then ended up having to come back because they just couldn't equal the, whether it was the 5 nines environment or just the security and so forth. It was something, we did try to get some systems off there, but just wasn't the right fit, and we ended up going back. And so there was those, for me, I checked in and out of the hotel 3 core times, which people will see in my guestbook entry when it comes out. But it's interesting to go back through those and reading some of the others in the first draft that you shared, which we're about to finalize. It was interesting just to read what, for many people, I think were life stories, like, these eureka moments of like, oh yeah, this was actually a formidable part of my life. And to that effect, we are going to have a final version for people to download, to read and enjoy in the same way that, as you said, a whole bunch of people, maybe, the Department of Finance says someone has a birthday and everyone signs it there, but it makes its way around the office and everyone kind of jokes about what they said. But one thing that did come up, and I'd love you to kind of touch on it, is that it was a reminder that as a programming language, it runs on more than just one ecosystem. It runs on Linux, on Unix. I mean, I've personally had my hands on Phoenix. I know people run it on Windows. But I mean, that's very much the case still today, isn't it?
Well, it's an interesting fact about COBOL that's probably not that well understood, because I mean it's often regarded as a bedfellow of the mainframe, and of course it is, because that's where a lot of the code runs, and of course that's where a lot of the most critical systems run. And that sort of holy trinity of COBOL kicks in the mainframe. That's where the world's economy is still running today. But interestingly, the designers, bearing in mind that COBOL predates the IBM mainframe, even it predates
Indeed.
the IBM 360 by 5 years. So COBOL was first developed to cross-compile because they needed it to be, to be portable across whatever machine it might be able to run on. That was the point of the exercise. It was running on, oh goodness me, Univacs and Burroughs, one or 2 others anyway. Yep. I can't remember what the second machine was that they got it to run on. But anyway, that was the initial test, and so from day one they said this programming language must be portable, because we don't yet know what the facto, what the go-to mainframe environment is going to be. And it wasn't for several years that it was, until IBM started to sort of get a handle on the market. So it means that COBOL is actually, it's easier to write a list of environments where COBOL doesn't run. Because its portability means that it's actually been made available, it's been ported, if you like, to use that phrase, to all range of environments, so currently it'll run across the whole IBM stack, no matter where you want to run it. But also, desktop environments too, and obviously every cloud environment as well. So it's pretty incredible how pervasive it is. I've got a stat somewhere that says that more than half of all COBOL shop run COBOL on at least 2 different environments.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I have a funny anecdote that I shared with you before, which I won't name the company or the brand, whatever, but I have an associate who has a company in the automotive space. They do sales and maintenance. They sell the actual vehicles and they maintain them. And while they're on holiday, they had a major IT outage. And when I ducked in to have a quick look, it was a Xenix running on x86 with COBOL, and 3270 sessions running on terminals, but Wise terminals of all things, emulating IBM terminals. But interesting that you note that this language predates IBM, who are in many ways famous for it, and there are certain claims made around who owns it and controls it. But if you go and do some homework, and there's also an interesting misnomer in that, not misnomer, but a misunderstanding that a lot of people think that Grace Hopper effectively created and invented the language. But interestingly enough, there was a lady called another lady, Mary Hawes, who was actually, I think, at the time at Burroughs, which ages me. And she saw a need at that stage. I think it was like early 1959, like March, from memory, if I remember my stats right. She put together a proposal for a new language that was, as you said, a lot more open, a lot more, cross-platform friendly. And at that stage, compilers are still a fairly new concept for a lot of ecosystems. And it was really hard to take people from one platform to another, one brand to another, because they really learned about writing stuff at assembler level. And she proposed, I think it was early 1959, around March, a new language. And the key thing was that it would be English-like vocab, and that the idea was subject matter experts in different parts of the business could learn this quickly in a near English-like format, and take their subject matter expertise, whether it's finance or engineering, manufacturing, whatever, human resource, and apply that knowledge to the language quickly, rather the other way around, where it was very hard to learn a language like Fortran or assembler, and then apply your knowledge to that. It was quite, and you're right. I think it was like Univac one was probably one of the early machines that got its first running environment on it, but very, very quickly. And I think other platforms like Unix and C language experienced a similar thing, where once it was running on one platform, people realized it was open, and that they can get a copy of the documentation. And I think someone said something to the fact that it was almost a weekend where it went from an idea to a couple of days later writing it up as a standard, to then very quickly people were immediately starting to actually develop code from that documentation and make it work. And that code written from that could be moved to other platforms that were independently built from that standard. And in a sense, it ran, which is kind of concerning. So yeah, and I think even now when we look at the bulk of what the actual syntax in the language is like, there's been some interesting additions, but the bulk of it is actually still very much based on that original document, that original standard, 65 years ago now, which is kind of funny when I think about how many times, different versions of Perl or Python have to be updated on my laptop week after week, and it sometimes breaks code. And yet we got code now that's been running for decades on a document that was put together in a weekend. And you mentioned something a lot of people don't understand. You mentioned that, a lot of day-to-day stuff we're doing, we are effectively interacting with COBOL multiple times a day. Give us a couple of examples where you're seeing that, where people might be shocked that if they're doing a particular thing, a transaction, that there's a COBOL environment behind it that's actually running it 24/7.
I think a classic example is, and you're right. There's a stat that says you touched COBOL 6, 7, 8 times a day without realizing it. And of course, we do so much of our commercial transactions take place online now, and you think, well, it can't be a COBOL system running on my mobile device, and you'd be right about that. But the app is just a front end to a piece of connectivity that goes somewhere and actually does the processing there. Well, the processing there is often on a mainframe, and it's often running a COBOL application. So if you check if you're constantly zapping your bank app to see if to do the refresh and see if you've got more money than you did 5 minutes ago, and alas, it's the same answer, then it's hitting a COBOL system on a mainframe somewhere. If you're moving any money around, or if you're, as I've just done recently, got a quotation for a new car from an insurance broker, from one of the many insurance brokers who all sort of compete with each other online. All of those systems are hitting COBOL algorithms that are giving you an insurance quotation. If you want to do some retail therapy online, if you want to book a trip, most of the systems behind the scenes are still running COBOL systems that have probably been there for quite some time. It's just that your means of connecting to them may have changed, which typically means they're more popular than ever, of course, because it's just second nature for us all to pick up our phone and just to fire up an app and do something, and because there's no cost to us. So all of that's still happening behind the scenes, and COBOL's doing all of that work for us quite happily. And of course, those systems have to be updated to support new business requirements for those applications. But they are still providing the same tried and trusted service, at warp speed. And they're handling our money, crucially, all of those fiscal transactions that are going on behind the scenes. We trust those answers that are coming back to us because it's using COBOL, and COBOL is better at handling numbers than pretty much any other language.
Yeah, I was reading something earlier this morning, doing a bit of homework around here, and a group who are hilariously called COBOL Cowboys, based in Texas, which I guess is, I think it's a husband and wife business with a large team around them. They were asked to put together some estimates of kind of just what volume of codes out there, and I think they estimated, correct me if I'm wrong, something in the order of 200 billion lines of code. That's 200,000 million lines of code. And they were quoted as saying that something as high as 90% of Fortune 500 still have some form of COBOL running somewhere to keep the lights on. And in fact, I dug up a fun quote of yours, and I'm gonna run it through here. Where I think for the 60th birthday, you said something to the effect that your quote is saying, while market sizing is difficult to specify with any accuracy, we do know the number of organizations running COBOL systems today is in the tens of thousands. It's impossible to estimate the tens of millions of end users who interface with COBOL-based applications on a daily basis, but the language reliance is clearly seen with its use in 70% of global transactions processing systems. And I was like, yeah, that encapsulates it all. And I think people do forget, a lot of people joke about the fact that if you book a trip somewhere on an airplane, maybe and all of a sudden you start thinking about the travel agent, and that classic computer says no, taka, 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 looking for the ticket and printing it, which is funny. But as you said, you pick up your phone and you go to your banking app and you hit refresh. It's making its way all the way through that ecosystem. In many ways, it's like these days, when you drive a car, it's fly by wire. You put your foot down on the accelerator, you're not physically pushing something that's letting more petrol, and it's just a little thing that's signaling to push a pump somewhere. And when you go from turning the steering wheel or pushing the accelerator, what makes the wheels and the rubber hit the road are not all physically interconnected. It's all logical. And I think it's the same with the ecosystem between various apps, whether it's web or mobile device, that there's a big stack in between that, with the app on the device, the internet connectivity between it, the routers, the switches, the firewalls, the web layer, the mid-level, the back-end systems, and then when you finally get to the back end where the data is sitting somewhere on disk in system and memory, it's a machine running COBOL, and it may or may not be directly a mainframe, which is interesting. So back to kind of what we're doing. So we've touched on the fact that your awesome idea of doing a guest book where you can check in and out of the Hotel COBOL concept. We'll have that coming out soon. We'll have details wherever you see this video, where you will be able to get access to that and download a copy in PDF and read it. But also, we would love you to join the conversation, and we will have created a hashtag, which is COBOL65, hash COBOL65 or pound COBOL65, depending on where you are. We would love you to join the conversation. We'll have links to where you can see the resources. We'll also have on alnion.com, there'll be a parent article, which will be a bit more of a live blog, if you like, where between Derek and I, we'll be keeping track of what's coming about this month and through the rest of the year with regard to COBOL and COBOL 65, what people are commenting, what they're saying, what the companies might be maybe doing, any new announcements. We'll be getting that article out, and we'll share that through the hash COBOL65 hashtag and through digital social promotion. And we'll link to Derek and my profile and others who participate. And we'd love you to join in, love you to share your anecdotes, share your comments, obviously retweet it and reshare it on LinkedIn and other platforms, and just join the conversation and be part of it. What are some of the things that you'd love people to do with regard to just joining this conversation with regard to COBOL turning 65, Derek?
Well, I find it fascinating every time I speak to, a different organization with it who's had a different use case of COBOL, and there's been some wide and varied, the use cases for how COBOL has been sort of famously put to work to run the economy. And I mean, in the banking world, in financial services, it's fairly well documented and fairly well understood just how much there is and what kinds of things COBOL's doing for the industry. But you look elsewhere, and COBOL will pop up as because it's an enterprise business systems language, so it's very good for commerce in general and government in general. But it's been put to work by organizations that are in the music industry, that are in the food production industry, that you run farms on COBOL, apparently, in some cases. And it's even used to manage, control, monitor stats of Major League Baseball, for example. I mean, some much more, shall we say, colorful anecdotes they're all out there. And a world of COBOL, or indeed a world without COBOL, would be a very, very different place. So getting any stories of any colourful stories about how COBOL has been put to use and what it's meant for the people that either built those systems or use those systems. I think it would be absolutely fascinating to learn the sort of the real world story of the language and how it's been valued by so many and across such a sort of diverse range. So I mean, that's kind of what's of most interest to me. But I mean, really and truly, using this as a mechanism to actually put the record straight, sort of qualitatively, what does COBOL mean to the world, and if it yeah, are we running a retirement party here, or are we just throwing a big birthday party? I think I know the answer. I don't want to give the game away, but it'll be interesting to see what we get back.
It is, and with that in mind, as I said, hash COBOL65, the number, we will be putting out promotional posts around this with digital and social media platforms, lots of them. We'd love you to take part. We'd love you to follow Derek and myself and join that conversation. Join the conversation. Share some of those anecdotes. Tell us what skills you've got currently that you're applying to the ecosystems that are run on COBOL. Do you think there's enough skills around the space? Do you think there should be more skills? And if so, why? Share why. Talk about some of the challenges around it. There's a lot of concern around running it in monolithic mode, and that's sort of often not the desired environment to run code on, and yet let's learn why. Let's hear your stories. Let's share your anecdotes. Surprise us where you're running it, as Derek said. What are some of the more wacky things you're doing with it? What are some of the more fundamental, crucial things you're doing, and why? We'd love to hear it. Reach out. And also, we're very, very keen for people to join us on either podcast or video conversations like this to share those anecdotes. So if you reach out and share your stories with us, we may reach out and invite you back onto the show with us on video. We may invite you to join us on a longer form audio podcast. And if you'd really got a great story, we might even invite you to have your own byline at elneon.com, as Derek and myself do, to share those anecdotes at length. But in the meantime, Derek, great to see you. We won't share too much more about where we're going, but we will have links to those. We'll have details of how to connect with you and myself. We would love people to join the conversation by using the #COBOL65 hashtag. Reach out. We will have links to where to get access to the guestbook and download the PDF to enjoy it. And share those stories. Reach out. We would love to have you on the show. We'd love to bring you onto the podcast. We'd love to have you write something if you've got something really interesting. And if worst case, have a conversation with Derek and he'll write an article about it as well. Derek, great to see you. Great initiative. It's so much fun. I'm wondering whether maybe we have cake next year as well. 65 is just as valid. 66 is just as valid in my mind when there's cake involved. Thanks so much for making this a thing, and I'm really honored to be part of it. It's going to be great fun. And like you, I'm looking forward to seeing some of those amazing anecdotes and insights. It'll be interesting to see if we can survey the age range as to sort of the youngest to oldest as to who's cutting their teeth on COBOL now for the first time versus who's got the most mileage way back, although some may not want to age themselves. But if you're a taxi driver in London, I hear that your CV can be dusted off and you can still get a good job.
Yeah, well, we're all young at heart, Des. I think that's the main answer.
It is indeed, as is COBOL, the language. Well, Derek, great to see you. Thank you so much for making time to catch up. We'll look forward to following this conversation on board. We'll have you back again soon to talk about more of the details. But folks, do follow the links below wherever you see this video. We'll have links to the relevant resources. Grab a copy of the guest book, have a good old read and a chuckle. Share your own anecdotes on whatever platform you're on with the #COBOL65 hashtag. We'll look forward to you being in the conversation. And Derek, we'll have you back on again soon to continue the discussion. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Des.